quarterbacks we know are going to go somewhere very high in round one. And so, Tim, once and for all, on the week of the draft, I want you to rank them. In what order would you take these 5 guys if it was you making the decisions?
Well, if I was making the decision, the first one is easy, and the first one is probably pretty much unanimous around the league, and it's Trevor Lawrence as the top prospect. There's so much to like about Trevor. I mean, it's hard to find something that you aren't crazy about in terms of things that he can do. He's an excellent athlete. He's a very developed passer. You love the size, the intelligence, even the leadership stuff. You know, he's checking all boxes. I said if he's not a 10 across the board, he's no worse than an 8. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have him rated in the realm of guys like Andrew Luck. At the number 2 spot for me would be Justin Fields. And I know that we've talked about him quite a bit on this show. He's a guy who I have said has the talent to be a league MVP. I don't think he's anything like some of the other quarterbacks that have come out of Ohio State. When you watch him, his athleticism jumps off the page, and I think he's a way better passer than people have given him credit for being. He's another guy I think has excellent leadership qualities. I think he has a chance to be an awesome pro. Zach Wilson would be my 3rd quarterback. When I look at Zach Wilson, I see a guy that I think has traits that are similar to Jay Cutler. And people can think what they want about Jay Cutler, but the reality is very few people have ever been able to spin a football the way Cutler was able to spin a football. And I think Zach Wilson has talent that is similar to that. Basically can attack all areas of the field. I think he's a developed passer, and I think he's a better than advertised athlete. I think you can really build around him. Trey Lance would be my next guy at number 4. Lance is one of these guys that I think is a true prospect. You're drafting on potential. You know, 1 year at a lower level of competition, plus 1 game. He dominated that level because he was a better athlete than everybody else. But I think you can see evidence of him being able to develop as a passer. So in the right situation, with the right coaching, he could become a star, but I think there's boom or bust qualities there. And then at number 5, a guy that obviously I've been on the record with in Mac Jones. I think he's a good prospect. I've said that I don't think that he's a first rounder. The reason I say it is I just think that he's athletic deficient when you compare him to other guys at the position. That does
winning record this year, and probably perhaps the bigger story here is the very short leash that is on their head coach and their GM here, guys. We know they're hanging on here for their jobs. They need a quarterback. They need to make a move here that can give their offense and Coach Nagy something to work with to give it some life so they can have some success. So if there's any team I think that is desperate, that should be doing this, a team that we know was in on Russell Wilson a few weeks ago, the Chicago Bears should do something to get a quarterback.
Yeah, I think the hot seat situation you're talking about there is a major factor. Meanwhile, guys, sneaky big news over the weekend. I don't want to let this go without comment on it here. In a very unusual trade between AFC contenders, the Ravens sent the Chiefs Pro Bowl tackle Orlando Brown in exchange for multiple draft picks. It's a big trade. They got a lot in return. Notably, they get the Chiefs' first-round pick. The Chiefs get Baltimore's second-round pick. But if you take a look at this, look at all these new names that will be on the offensive line for Kansas City. We know how badly they struggled in the Super Bowl because they had both tackles banged up. Well, here's a whole bunch of new names they brought in, and that doesn't even take into account 2 players who opted out for them last year who will be back. So with that thought in mind, but before I do anything else, Dominique, I just have to come to you as a Raven. I mean, the Ravens, this is their arch rival, right? I mean, that's the mountain they can't climb, and they just traded them exactly what they need. I found that surprising. How did you find it?
Yeah, from that standpoint, I think maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it seems pretty obvious when you look at their roster. They paid Ronnie Stanley enough to be a left tackle. They're not going to be able to afford to keep Orlando Brown, who took over for Stanley when he got injured, at left tackle after this season. So this was a smart thing to do. They were going to lose him at the end of the season anyway. Now they got an extra draft pick that they could possibly use to get a cheap replacement for him in the first round. So I think this was a smart move by the Ravens, and they believe that their defense can't be stopped by just one tackle if they go up against the Chiefs once again.
No, They don't have a lot of evidence of that, but I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Well, I mean, the point is that the tackle isn't going to be the difference maker in that situation, I guess.
I hear you, but I mean, so Tim, let's just look at that. And I just put that full screen up there. It's not just this move, but all the moves Kansas City has made. We already were talking about them as the favorites in the AFC because of the quarterback and the coach, but now they seem to have gotten exactly what they needed to put themselves right back where they want to be, yes?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, Greeny. And, I think we probably need to give Kansas City the credit that we used to give New England, and the fact that New England would always have a plan. When they would cut a certain player, well, they had a replacement in mind. And I think that that's how we have to look at the Chiefs. Think about it. When they had Dee Ford and it was like, well, they let him go. Well, they replaced him with Frank Clark. Or they had a plan when they drafted Patrick Mahomes of sitting him. And they had, a plan with how they're going to deal with Tyreek Hill after they drafted him. I just think that they are a team that leaves no stone unturned. And I think that we probably haven't talked about them in that regard. Look, I think the situation in the Super Bowl kind of got thrust on them with injuries late in the year, and they found themselves playing in the Super Bowl without either starting tackle. They're not going to let that happen, and this is clearly their plan when you go back and look at both tackles basically being released, just a month or so ago.
Yeah, Diana, circling it back to you here. What did you hear around the league after this trade?
Yeah, Tim, I love that connection you make there in terms of them, Veach making just really good decisions. And of course, we know Andy Reid's got his paws all over this. They've really turned into an organization that has a plan and sticks with it. But Greeny, I think what's interesting, and applying this to the draft coming up in a few days here, this just goes to show you that the Kansas City Chiefs probably felt it was too expensive, it would cost them too much to move up in the draft to get an offensive lineman. So around the league, this is looked at as obviously the price being too high for Kansas City, but also perhaps the depth at the offensive line position for this rookie class. Perhaps it's not at the level that the Chiefs needed and wanted it to be. So all in all, most think that this was a really fair, smart trade by both teams. I wasn't hearing a lot of criticism over the weekend.
Yeah, there are a bunch of left tackles who figure to go rounds 2 or 3, and maybe this is a statement. Names you may not know: Jackson Carman and Dylan Radins and a few others. The Rashawn Slaters and the Penei Sewells of the world will be long gone by the time Kansas City would have been picking. Guys, stay tight. Lots more football as we go. But to the game, quarterbacks we know are going to go somewhere very high in round 1. And so, Tim, once and for all, on the week of the draft, I want you to rank them. In what order would you take these 5 guys if it was you making the decisions?
Well, if I was making the decision, the first one is easy, and the first one is probably pretty much unanimous around the league, and it's Trevor Lawrence as the top prospect. There's so much to like about Trevor. I mean, it's hard to find something that you aren't crazy about in terms of things that he can do. He's an excellent athlete. He's a very developed passer. You love the size, the intelligence, even the leadership stuff. He's checking all boxes. I said if he's not a 10 across the board, he's no worse than an 8. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have him rated in the realm of guys like Andrew Luck. At the number 2 spot for me would be Justin Fields. And I know that we've talked about him quite a bit on this show. He's a guy who I have said has the talent to be a league MVP. I don't think he's anything